NXT is 2-0 against Dynamite over the past 2 weeks, but will they make it 3-0? Will they make it a hat trick next week? We're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss it right here, right now. Welcome back, guys, to Fog Wrestling. Let's talk about WWE NXT versus AEW Dynamite and the ratings. And to do that, we're going to look at the ratings for this year so far. So, on Gerwick.net, we have the 2024 TV ratings for the year for the majority of the big wrestling shows. Shout out to Gerwick.net. Now, they do have a couple of Impact ratings, but I believe for Impact to be acknowledged on the rating, they need to be like in the top 150. Most weeks they are not, so therefore we can't even find out what the Impact Wrestling ratings really are, which kind of sucks because it would be nice to know just how far they are behind Rampage and Collision, but we're not going to focus on any of those other shows right now. We're going to look at WWE NXT versus Dynamite, and we're just going to see how it started off and see how it currently is now. So we'll look at the first few weeks of the year. I mean, WWE NXT were doing good numbers, but they were behind Dynamite. Dynamite weren't doing great. 801, then 797. So, I mean, consistent, but not consistently good. And then you could see NXT begin to drop off after the second week of the year. They dropped into the 600,000 territory, and then they started getting into the 500,000 territory, which is very strange. And I do think that it's not only is it strange and worrying, but it's just, I can't put a finger on it, because this was like Royal Rumble, WrestleMania period. You're building up to Stand and Deliver, and you're putting on some really, really poor ratings. Now, in my opinion, I thought NXT was really bad at this point because both the main champions, Trick Williams and Lyra Valkyria, weren't doing much for me. I thought both of them were extremely boring, but still, these ratings were poor. They were not heading in a good direction. Meanwhile, for Dynamite, I mean, they were just about keeping their head over the 700,000 territory. You know, they were dropping into the 700,000 territory sometimes, but majority of the times they were staying 800,000 or above. So up until April 8th, they only had 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, is that 5? No, 4. So they had 4 shows that dropped under 800,000. So they were doing about 800,000 probably pretty consistently. I remember they got the 779, then they got 801, 800, and then the following 2 weeks they dropped under 800,000 to 747 and 752. And it was at this point Tony Khan had the bright idea of showing the CM Punk All Out footage. He showed that the next week, and they got a small ratings increase. They did 819,000. Tony Khan at this point was bragging about the views that AEW Dynamite was getting. Of course, this was over the WrestleMania period as well, so he was touting out the numbers, tweeting out the numbers. He was saying how he's thankful for everybody that tuned in. He showed the all-out footage to get a big ratings bump, and it didn't really work out for him. He got a bit of a bump, or a small bump. Anyway, the plot was to try and get AEW Dynamite back above 800k, because the last 2 weeks they dropped under that. However, in doing so, that seems to be the turning point of the, what can I call it, the disaster that is AEW Dynamite ratings. Because since this show, since the 8th of April edition where they dished out the CM Punk footage, that was the last time we've seen Dynamite get above 800k. They went straight back to 762. Then they did 683, which was very worrying. They had a couple of weeks where they managed to get above 700k. Tony Khan was happy, just to fall back under to 672. Then they had like 3 weeks where it looked like things were heading in the right direction. You know, MJF was back. They had a pay-per-view build-up in here as well. They did 713, 787, 790. And then at this point, you're probably thinking, right, there's, 3 increases in consecutive weeks. We're at 790. Probably looks like Dynamite's going to get back into the 800,000 territory, but what we see is Dynamite drop back under 700,000 to 681, and then I don't even know what happened this week. June 19th, who knows what happened there, but they had a massive drop off and were lucky to stay above 500,000 viewers with a rating of 502,000. And not only is that a horrible rating for AEW Dynamite, but at the same time, WWE NXT has started to improve. If we look at WWE NXT over the past month, you can see after Stand and Deliver, they were still doing like low to mid 600,000s. You had a couple of 500,000s in there, but it was really poor. But from this May 13th to 18th week, they got an increase of almost 100,000 to 654. Then they went to 703,000, so it was the first time they were above 700,000 since the second week of January. And then they did 768, 718, and 724. So they've had 4 consecutive weeks of 700,000 plus ratings, whereas we've seen Dynamite with 2 consecutive weeks under 700,000. The last 2 weeks, NXT has defeated Dynamite with 718,000 to 681 and 724,000 to 502,000. So, looking at this, WWE NXT is on the way up and Dynamite is on the way down. Now, I do think Dynamite will improve next week. I think the rating has to go up. It surely can't be lower than 502. If I had to make a prediction, I think they'll be back in the 600,000 range. Maybe they'll be able to sneak into the low 700,000 range, but I don't think they'll do any more than that. As for WWE NXT, I suspect they'll probably stay around the same rating. I think they'll do something similar. I think they'll maintain that 700,000, and if they do that, that will probably be enough to beat Dynamite. So yeah, I'm going to say NXT completes the hat-trick. I think they will make it 3 weeks in a row with better ratings, but looking at this, it is very, very worrying. So yeah, you just look at WWE NXT, it seems to be on the way up, whereas Dynamite seems to be on the way down. And these ratings are poor. I keep going back to that April show. He showed the CM Punk footage, trying to get a bit of a pop. He got a little bit of a ratings bump, and we all talked about it in the video at the time. It's like, is it really worth the damage? Embarrassing the company, showing that? Is it really worth, you got a small ratings boost, but is it really worth all the negatives that will follow? And since then, it's been a lot of negatives. Since then, they've failed to hit the 800k mark. And that could have been the moment that drove some people off. I know a lot of people were saying they ain't going to watch Dynamite while the Young Bucks are still there, while the Young Bucks are being shoved down our throat. Some people said after the CM Punk stuff, they were never going to watch it again. And that looks to be the case, because there's no doubt that since that show, Dynamite have lost viewers. Even in the 2 March weeks where they made 800k, it was barely. So we're talking like it's been since February, and since AEW Dynamite was regularly hitting 800k. So that's quite a long time now. Almost 4 months. So it's not looking good for Dynamite. We'll see what they can do this week, though. I suspect they will lose to WWE NXT. I think Tony Khan is going to have to dig deep. I think he's going to have to go back into his pockets. He's brought in all these stars who just ain't stars. Mercedes Moné, flop, never worth the money, didn't deserve it. And then he's brought in Ospreay and Okada, 2 guys that were unknown to the Western world, 2 guys that just are not draws, are not stars. I don't care what they've done in Japan. They ain't done shit over here. They ain't done anything to be noticed by a European audience or a North American audience. So, yeah, those 2 guys getting brought in, big $1 million contracts, they ain't did nothing. So it's just sad. Plus, you've got the return of MJF, and there's not a lot of big things that Tony has left up his sleeve. He's going to have to go back to the drawing board. He's going to have to go back to hiring more talents. And there's not that many people out there, because everybody who can draw is pretty much either dead or past it. They've retired. So Tony Khan is going to need to create new stars, and it doesn't look like he's capable of doing that. So yeah, guys, we'll see what happens, but I do think that WWE NXT is probably going to be the 3rd biggest show now going ahead. I wouldn't be surprised if they maintain that, and they are regularly beating Dynamite now. And it's going to be tough for Dynamite to come back for this. Anyway, guys, catch you in the next one. Till then, peace.